One intro and silent truth. She never begged him to stay. She never raised her voice. And that is how she lost herself. Some love stories don't end with shouting. They don't end with slammed doors or final goodbyes. They end quietly. So quietly that no one notices what was lost. She loved him in all the quiet ways. Not with grand gestures. Not with demands. But with presence. She remembered how he took his coffee. She noticed when his voice sounded tired. She stayed, even when he wasn't really there. And he didn't leave. That's the part people don't understand. He stayed. Physically. Consistently. Predictably. But emotionally. He was always just a few steps away. This is the kind of abandonment no one warns you about. When someone doesn't disappear. But never truly arrives. When love isn't rejected. Just never received. She told herself it was enough. That being patient was maturity. That wanting less made her strong. So she learned to speak softer. To need less. To love without asking. Until one day, she realized she had become very easy to keep. And very easy to overlook. This story isn't about a man who walked away. It's about a woman who stayed. And slowly disappeared. If stories like this speak to the parts of you you've never said out loud, please subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast. This space is for the quiet truths we carry alone. Now, let's talk about what abandonment really looks like. When no one leaves. To love without noise. She loved him. Without noise. No dramatic speeches. No ultimatums. No moments that demanded attention. Her love didn't interrupt his life. It quietly adjusted around it. She learned the rhythm of his silence. When not to ask. When not to lean too close. When to let a conversation end. Before it became uncomfortable. She called it respect. She told herself that real love didn't need to be loud. That calm meant safety. That stillness meant depth. So she stopped asking questions that might change the air. Stopped reaching for moments that weren't offered. Stopped expecting responses that never came. Not because she didn't feel. But because she felt too much. And didn't want to lose him. She became fluent in subtlety. The way she smiled instead of asking why he pulled away. The way she filled the silence. So he wouldn't have to. She waited for warmth in small gestures. A hand on her back. A text that arrived first. A moment of eye contact that lingered. And when those moments didn't come, she learned how to pretend she hadn't noticed. He didn't ask her to be quiet. He didn't ask her to shrink. She just did. Because love without noise feels safer. When you're afraid of being left. Over time, she confused peace with absence. Stability with emotional distance. Consistency with connection. And he grew comfortable. Comfortable being loved without effort. Comfortable receiving without giving. Comfortable knowing she would stay. No matter how little space he offered her. This is how love fades without breaking. No betrayal. No cruelty. Just a slow rearranging of needs. Until one person disappears inside the relationship. She told herself this was what maturity looked like. This was what compromise felt like. This was what love was supposed to be. But deep inside, a quiet question kept returning. How long can you love someone without being felt? 3. Defining abandonment. Abandonment isn't always someone walking out. Sometimes it's someone staying and still making you feel alone. We were taught to recognize abandonment by absence, by empty chairs, unanswered calls, a door that never opens again. But there's another kind. The kind that leaves no evidence. No dramatic ending. No final fight. No clear reason you can point to and say, that's where it broke. It just thins out. Abandonment can be a conversation that never goes deeper than weather. A hug that ends too quickly. How was your day? That isn't followed by listening. It can be a partner who looks at you, but doesn't see you. And the most confusing part? They might be kind. They might pay the bills. Show up to events. Answer texts. sleep beside you at night. So you tell yourself you're lucky. You tell yourself you're asking for too much. You tell yourself, this is what adult love looks like. But your body knows. Your chest tightens when you start a sentence. Because you already feel the dismissal coming. Your voice softens without permission. Your needs shrink before they reach your mouth. You rehearse your feelings like they're negotiations. You edit your truth, so it won't cost you their presence. That's not peace. That's survival. This is emotional abandonment. When your longing is treated like an inconvenience. When your tears are met with silence. Not cruelty, just distance. When you're hurting and the person you love acts confused. As if your pain is a language they never learned. And if you grew up around abandonment, you might not even call it that. You might call it normal. You might call it fine. You might say, at least he's not cheating. At least he's not yelling. So you settle for the minimum? And learn to be grateful for scraps. But abandonment isn't measured by what someone doesn't do to you. It's measured by what they refuse to give you. Presence. Warmth. Emotional safety. The feeling that you matter. Without having to earn it. And when you don't get that, you start building a life inside the relationship. Where you expect nothing. Because expecting hurts. And that's how abandonment becomes invisible. Until one day you realize you've been lonely with someone right beside you. For the invisible absence. His absence didn't look like leaving. It looked like being right there. He was in the room. On the couch. At the table. His keys in the bowl. His jacket on the chair. He answered when she spoke. He smiled at the right moments. He said, I'm fine, in that calm voice that made everything sound settled. But something was missing. Not a thing you can point at. Not a fight you can replay. Just a quiet hollow space where connection should have been. Evelyn started noticing it in tiny ways. The way he didn't ask follow-up questions. The way his eyes would move past her. As if her words were background noise. The way he would hold her for a second. Then release her like he had done his part. He wasn't cruel. That's what made it harder. Cruelty gives you clarity. Cruelty gives you a reason to walk away. But this was soft. This was polite. This was invisible. She began to feel like she was living beside a closed door. Not locked. Not slammed. Just closed. And every day she told herself, maybe tomorrow it will open. So she tried different versions of herself. The quiet version. The funny version. The low-maintenance version. She learned how to bring him peace. Even if it meant losing her own. She stopped saying, I miss you. Because he was technically there. How do you miss someone who never leaves the room? She would talk about something that mattered to her, a fear. A dream, a memory. And he would nod. And offer a solution. Not comfort. Not presence. A fix. As if feelings were problems to be solved. Instead of pain to be held. And when she tried to get closer, he would get tired. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. Long day. Can we talk later? I'm not in the mood for heavy stuff. Later became a habit. And heavy became anything honest. She started carrying her emotions the way you carry a glass of water in the dark. Careful, quiet, afraid of spilling, afraid that one wrong sentence would make him disappear even more. And that's the invisible absence. When the person you love doesn't walk out, they simply withdraw, inch by inch, until you're left loving a silhouette, a body that stays, a voice that answers, a life that looks normal. But your heart keeps reaching out and touching air. 5 Inner adaptation begins. At some point, she stopped asking why. Not because she understood, but because understanding stopped changing anything. Instead, she adapted. Quietly. Instinctively. Like someone learning how to survive a climate that never warms. She adjusted her expectations first. What used to feel natural now felt like too much. A long conversation. A vulnerable moment. A question that needed more than a nod. So she shortened herself. She learned how to read the room before she spoke. How to sense his mood before she shared her own. How to swallow a feeling before it could become a request. She told herself this was love. That real love meant being flexible, being patient, being understanding, even when nothing was explained. She stopped saying what she needed and started needing less. Not because she didn't have needs, but because having them felt dangerous. Needs created tension. Needs invited distance. Needs made her feel replaceable. So she became easy. Easy to be with. Easy to please. Easy to forget. She told herself she was being mature. That she was choosing peace. But peace that costs you your voice isn't peace. It's silence. Inside her, something shifted. Her emotions didn't disappear. They went underground. She started processing everything alone. Her joy. Her disappointment. Her loneliness. She learned not to reach out when she felt overwhelmed. Not to lean in when she needed comfort. She became her own witness. And slowly, she began to feel like she existed only in the space she didn't take up. She took pride in not being too much. In not needing reassurance. In not asking for more. But there was a quiet grief underneath. The grief of knowing she could be more. If only she felt safe enough to be. Inner adaptation doesn't feel like loss at first. It feels like control. Like strength. Like growth. But what's really happening is that you're shaping yourself around someone else's absence. Until one day, you look at the version of yourself you've become and realize you didn't change because you wanted to. You changed because you were afraid of being left behind. 6. Becoming easy to love. She didn't become easy to love overnight. It happened slowly, like water shaping stone. At first, it looked like kindness. She stopped bringing up things that might stress him. She chose lighter topics. She smiled through her own disappointment. Because she didn't want to be a problem. She told herself she was being supportive. Then it became a skill. She learned how to keep her feelings neat. Folded. Quiet. Out of the way. She learned how to say, "It's nothing," when it was clearly something. How to laugh off moments that hurt. How to swallow questions before they could sound like needs. She became the kind of partner everyone praises. Low maintenance. Understanding. So chill. The kind of woman who doesn't ask for reassurance. Who doesn't need long talks. Who doesn't need much. And that's the trap. Because when you become easy to love, you often become easy to ignore. Not out of malice. Out of comfort. He didn't have to reach. So he didn't. He didn't have to explain. So he didn't. He didn't have to show up emotionally. Because she made it possible for him to stay without doing that. And she called that stability. She started measuring her worth by how little she asked for. How long she could wait. How quiet she could be. How well she could carry her own sadness without spilling it onto him. She treated her emotions like clutter. Something to clean up. Before he came home, she learned to anticipate him. If he looked tired, she became softer. If he seemed distant, she became easier. If he pulled away, she pulled back first. So it wouldn't feel like rejection. And little by little, she disappeared behind her own understanding. She told herself, if I make loving me effortless, he'll finally stay close. But closeness doesn't grow where truth isn't allowed to breathe. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize you've been performing safety. Instead of living in it, you've been offering comfort. Instead of receiving it, you've been making room for someone who keeps you on the edge of theirs. Becoming easy to love can look like devotion, but sometimes it's just abandonment, directed inward. 7. Cost of staying. Staying didn't look like sacrifice at first. It looked like loyalty, like patience, like love that was strong enough But the cost didn't arrive all at once. It came in small payments. Daily. Quiet. Almost polite. She paid with her voice. The first time she chose not to say, "That hurt." The first time she smiled through disappointment. The first time she swallowed a need. Because she didn't want to make him distant. She paid with her body. Tension in her shoulders she couldn't explain. A tightness in her chest that showed up at night. Sleep that never fully rested her. Because even in silence, she was listening. Listening for mood. Listening for distance. Listening for the moment. She might accidentally ask for too much. She paid with her joy. Because joy asks to be shared. And when she reached for him, even with good news, his reaction was small. A nod. A quick, "That's great." A return to his phone. So she stopped bringing her happiness to the table. Not out of spite. Out of protection? When you stay in emotional scarcity, you stop spending emotions. You become careful. You ration yourself. And one day, you realize the relationship has a budget. And you're the only one paying. That's the cost of staying. You turn into a version of yourself who requires less. Because asking costs too much. She also paid with her sense of reality. Because when something hurts but no one acknowledges it, you start to question your own feelings. Am I too sensitive? Am I dramatic? Is this just how love is? And when you can't name what's missing, you start blaming yourself for missing it. She became the calm one. The composed one. The easy one. And people admired her for it. But admiration doesn't heal loneliness. It just makes you feel guilty for having it. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at him, watching the way he existed so comfortably, while she was constantly adjusting. And a thought would rise. Quiet, dangerous. If I left, would anything change? Then she would push it down. Because leaving felt like failure. Because staying felt like devotion. Because she had been taught that love means endurance. But endurance isn't the same as connection. You can endure a drought. That doesn't mean you're being nourished. And the hardest truth? The longer she stayed, the more she forgot what it felt like. To be met. To be held without earning it. To be listened to without shrinking. Staying didn't break her loudly. It just wore her down into silence. 8. Loving alone. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being single. It comes from being chosen. And still feeling unwanted. Evelyn wasn't alone in the obvious ways. She had someone to text. Someone to eat dinner with. Someone whose name sat next to hers in people's minds. From the outside, it looked like love. From the inside, it felt like she was always reaching toward a wall. Loving alone is strange. Because you keep doing relationship things. But you stop expecting relationship comfort. You stop saying, "Can you hold me?" And start saying, "It's okay." You stop asking, "Do you miss me?" And start telling yourself, "He's just stressed." You learn to translate absence into excuses. And the worst part? You become good at it. Good at filling the silence. Good at carrying the mood. Good at making the relationship feel normal. Even when you're starving in it. She began to celebrate tiny signs like they were miracles. A warm, "good morning." A hand that stayed a second longer. A sentence that sounded almost tender. She would replay those moments in her head. Like proof that she wasn't imagining things. Like proof that she was still loved. But love that only appears in crumbs. Trains you to live on crumbs. And when you're hungry enough, you start calling crumbs a meal. She stopped bringing her sadness to him. Not because she didn't trust him. But because she didn't want to watch him turn away again. That turn. That subtle shift of attention. Hurt more than silence. So she processed everything in private. In the bathroom with the faucet running. In the car before she walked into the house. In bed, staring at the ceiling. While his breathing stayed steady beside her. Sometimes she would look at him sleeping. And feel this sharp, impossible question. How can someone be this close? And this far? She started becoming her own partner. She soothed herself, answered her own questions, held her own grief. She learned to take care of herself the way she wished he would. And that's when she realized she wasn't building intimacy. She was building resilience. Resilience is beautiful, but it's not what you should have to earn. Inside love, loving alone doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels quiet, functional, even peaceful. Because you stop hoping. And when you stop hoping, you stop getting hurt as often. But you also stop feeling alive. And one night, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, she heard herself say, "I'm fine," in the same flat tone he used. And it scared her, because she realized loneliness had become contagious. 9. Emotional unavailability. He wasn't the villain. That's what made it harder to name. If he had been cruel, she could have hated him. If he had cheated, she could have left with clarity. If he had shouted, there would have been a sound to follow. But Daniel was controlled, polite, functional, even gentle when it was easy. He didn't break her with anger. He wore her down with distance. Emotional unavailability doesn't always look cold. Sometimes it looks responsible. A man who shows up, who works hard, who doesn't cause drama, who handles things. But when you reach for his inner world, there's nothing to hold. He could talk about schedules, bills, plans, work. But the moment she spoke about feelings, his eyes would shift. Not in disgust, not in cruelty, in discomfort. Like she had asked him to speak a language he never learned. And the saddest truth? He didn't know he was doing it. To him, love meant staying, providing, not leaving. He thought his presence was proof. But Evelyn wasn't asking for proof. She was asking to be met, to be seen, to be held in the places that don't show on paper. She started watching his patterns. How he avoided eye contact when the conversation got honest. How he would joke when the moment turned tender. How he'd get sleepy right when she needed him to stay awake with her. He wasn't rejecting her. He was protecting himself from vulnerability, from discomfort, from the possibility of feeling something he couldn't control. Because some people learned early. Feelings are unsafe. Need is dangerous. Closeness costs. So they build walls. Not to punish you, but to survive. And loving someone like that can make you feel like you're always asking for too much. Evelyn tried to be careful. She softened every sentence. She added disclaimers. "I'm not mad, I don't want to start anything. But I'm probably overthinking, but..." She kept shrinking her truth until it fit inside his comfort. But comfort is not intimacy. There's a moment you recognize emotional unavailability. It's when you realize you're not fighting for love. You're fighting for access. Access to their attention, their warmth, their emotional presence. And you start to wonder? If love has to be negotiated, is it love? Still, she stayed. Because the hope was addictive. Every rare moment he opened up felt like winning. Every small softness felt like a sign. But a relationship built on rare moments teaches you to live in waiting. And waiting becomes your whole personality. He wasn't the villain, but he also wasn't available. And that difference is where her heart kept breaking. Quietly. 10. The unspoken bargain. There was a bargain between them. Unspoken, unwritten, but followed faithfully. Evelyn never said it out loud, because saying it would make it real. But her body lived by it. If I'm quiet enough, he won't leave. If I ask for less, he'll stay close. If I don't make waves, I'll be safe. It wasn't a lie she told him. It was a rule she gave herself. A private contract, signed in fear. And the worst part? He didn't even have to agree to it. Because she enforced it for both of them. That's how unspoken bargains work. One person trades their needs for the illusion of stability. The other person enjoys the calm and calls it peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace. It's avoidance. Every time she wanted to say, "I miss you," she translated it into something smaller. "Hope your day's going okay." Every time she wanted to say, "I feel alone," she softened it into, "Just tired tonight." Every time she wanted to ask, "Do you even want me?" she swallowed it and asked about groceries. And Daniel stayed. Because the bargain made it easy. No pressure. No vulnerability. No emotional responsibility. Just a relationship that asked him to show up physically. And not much else. But Evelyn paid for that ease. She paid with truth. She paid with spontaneity. Because she was always calculating. Always scanning. Is this a good time? Is he in the mood? Will this push him away? She treated love like a fragile object. Something that could break if she held it too tightly. And then, slowly, the bargain started changing her. She became proud of how little she needed. How understanding she was. How independent she looked. But inside, she was keeping score. Not out of bitterness. Out of grief. Because every time she chose silence, she lost a small piece of herself. And no one noticed. Especially not him. Because when someone benefits from the bargain, they rarely question it. They assume this is what love looks like. A partner who doesn't ask. Doesn't push. Doesn't require emotional effort. They don't realize that easy often means afraid. And Evelyn didn't realize, at first, that the bargain wasn't keeping her safe. It was keeping her small. It wasn't protecting the relationship. It was protecting his comfort. At the expense of her spirit. The unspoken bargain always has a hidden cost. You trade honesty for belonging. You trade your voice for closeness. And eventually, you wake up beside someone you love and realize the intimacy you wanted was never part of the deal. 11. Naming the truth. The truth didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived like breath. After holding it too long, Evelyn wasn't suddenly angry. She was clear. A quiet clarity. The kind that comes when you stop bargaining with reality. She stopped saying, "He's just stressed." Stopped saying, "It's my fault." Stopped saying, "Maybe I'm asking for too much." And for the first time, she let the words form. Without softening them. "I'm lonely in this relationship." Not sometimes. Not a little. Not only when he's tired. Lonely? Naming the truth is terrifying. Because it removes the last excuse. As long as the pain is blurry, you can keep hoping it will change. But once you name it, you have to face what it means. She started noticing how often she translated herself. How she replaced honesty with, "I'm fine." How she edited her needs into harmless sentences. How she apologized for emotions that were simply human. She realized she'd been speaking a dialect of love that required her to disappear. And she couldn't unsee it. The truth wasn't, "He doesn't love me." The truth was worse and simpler. "He can't meet me here." Not because he hates her. Not because he's evil. But because he's closed. And a closed person can still be kind. And still leave you starving. She remembered all the times she said, "Can we talk?" And he answered, "Not now." All the times she tried to share tenderness. And he turned it into a joke. All the times she cried quietly. So he wouldn't have to deal with it. And suddenly she understood. She wasn't being strong. She was being silent. Silence is not strength when it's rooted in fear. So she did something new. She stopped protecting his comfort more than her own heart. She stopped making the truth easier to swallow. Not with anger. With steadiness. When she finally said it to herself. Fully, plainly. It sounded like this. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for presence. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm asking you to feel me. I'm not asking for noise. I'm asking to be met." And once she named the truth, She felt the grief underneath it. Because naming the truth isn't just clarity. It's a goodbye to the version of love you kept hoping for. 12. Grief without a goodbye. Grief doesn't always come after someone leaves. Sometimes it comes while they're still there. Evelyn didn't lose a person. She lost a version of love. The one she kept reaching for. The one she kept hoping would appear. If she stayed kind enough, quiet enough, patient enough. And that's why the grief felt so confusing. Because there was no ending. No breakup speech. No last hug at the doorway. No, I wish you well. Just morning after morning. That looked the same. Dinner. Small talk. A shared bed. A life that kept moving. How do you mourn something that never officially died? How do you explain heartbreak when nothing happened? She tried to name it to herself. It wasn't grief for him. It was grief for what couldn't be with him. Grief for the conversations they never had. Grief for the tenderness that never stayed. Grief for the emotional home she kept building and kept finding empty. It's a strange kind of mourning. Because you can't point to a villain. There's no betrayal to rally around. No dramatic proof. Just the quiet truth. You've been living in a love that doesn't hold you back. And you keep calling it enough. Because it's all you've been given. Evelyn felt it in ordinary moments. In the grocery store, picking his favorite snack. And realizing he never remembered hers. In the car, hearing a song. And wanting to turn and say, "This is us." Then remembering he wouldn't hear it that way. In the middle of laughter. That didn't quite reach her chest. She began grieving in silence. Not because she wanted to hide. But because she didn't know how to share a grief that no one could see. Sometimes she would sit in the bathroom with the light off. Just to feel the truth without performing strength. No tears at first. Just that heavy, held in feeling. Like her heart was carrying a goodbye that hadn't been spoken. And the hardest part? He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. But he didn't know what to do with it. So she grieved alone. And grief, when it's lonely, starts to turn into shame. Why am I hurting? Why can't I just be grateful? Why'd I need more? Because you're human. Because you're not built to live unloved. In the place that's supposed to feel like love. Grief without a goodbye is the mourning of a future that won't happen. A future you kept feeding with your patience. A future you kept protecting with your silence. And when you finally realize it's not coming, your heart doesn't break loudly. It breaks like snow falling. Quiet. Soft. Relentless. Until one day you look up and realize everything has changed without anyone ever saying goodbye. 13. Quiet healing begins. Healing didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with honesty. Not the kind you announce. The kind you sit with. Evelyn didn't wake up suddenly strong. She woke up tired of pretending she was fine. And that was the beginning. Quiet healing doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand answers. It doesn't rush to forgive. It doesn't rewrite the past. It simply stops arguing with it. She began by letting herself feel, without fixing, the sadness, the anger she had never named, the exhaustion of loving with one hand tied behind her back. She didn't judge it. She didn't explain it away. She let it exist. There was no dramatic decision. Just small refusals. She refused to translate her pain into politeness. Refused to soften the truth to protect someone else's comfort. Refused to call numbness peace. She started choosing herself quietly. That choice looked ordinary. Taking a walk without checking her phone. Letting a message sit unanswered. Saying, "I need rest," without adding an apology. She didn't announce boundaries. She lived them. Quiet healing is learning how to come back to your body. Noticing when your shoulders finally drop. When your breath deepens. When silence stops feeling like danger. She realized how long she'd been bracing. Waiting for disappointment. and how healing felt unfamiliar. There were days she missed him. Not the man as he was, but the hope she had wrapped around him. And she let herself miss that. Grief doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. It softens when you stop abandoning yourself too. She learned to listen inward. To the discomfort she used to override. To the longing she used to silence. To the quiet voice that said, "This matters." And for the first time, she believed it. Healing wasn't about becoming harder. It was about becoming honest. She stopped asking, "Why couldn't he love me better?" and started asking, "What do I need to feel safe with myself?" That question changed everything. Because the answer didn't involve him. Quiet healing begins the moment you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing to stay with yourself. 14. Letting go without drama. Letting go didn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet decisions, made in the same rooms where she used to wait. Evelyn didn't slam doors. She didn't post quotes. She didn't demand closure. Because the truth was, closure was never something Daniel offered. And she was done begging for what should be basic. Letting go without drama is strange. It looks like nothing. No scene. No breakup speech that shocks the room. Just a woman who stops reaching for hands that don't reach back. She stopped testing him. Stopped asking questions just to see if he would finally care. Stopped proving her love through patience. Because patience, when it becomes self-erasure, isn't virtue. It's self-abandonment. So she began to release him. In small, invisible ways. She stopped arranging her day around his mood. Stopped waiting for the right moment to speak. Stopped rehearsing her feelings like requests. She started speaking plainly. Not harshly. Not dramatically. Plainly. If she was tired, she said she was tired. If something hurt, she named it. If she needed space, she took it. No apology. And that alone changed the air. Because when you stop performing, easy, people feel the difference. Daniel noticed. Not with panic. With confusion. He would ask, "Are you okay?" The way you ask when the pattern shifts. And she would answer, "Yes." Because she was. Not because the relationship had suddenly become warm, but because she had stopped giving her warmth away for free. Letting go without drama is also accepting that you may never be understood. You may never get the speech, the confession, the apology that makes the pain feel justified. Sometimes the most honest ending is the one you give yourself. "I won't explain my worth anymore." She didn't need him to admit it. She didn't need him to call it abandonment. She only needed to stop calling it love. And grief still came. Because letting go isn't cold. It's tender. It's choosing not to keep bruising yourself on the same wall. It's understanding that love without presence is just longing. So she let the fantasy dissolve. The fantasy that if she stayed gentle enough, he would finally arrive. She let it go the way you let go of a balloon. Not with anger, but with a soft release of fingers. And in that release, she didn't feel dramatic. She felt clean. Like someone who finally stopped holding their breath. 15. Choosing presence. Choosing presence didn't mean choosing someone new. It meant choosing to stay awake inside her own life. For a long time, Evelyn thought presence came from another person. From being chosen. From being wanted. From someone finally showing up. The way she had been showing up all along. But presence isn't given. It's practiced. She began noticing where she used to disappear. Moments she rushed through. Feelings she muted. Days she survived instead of lived. She started slowing down. Not to wait for anyone, but to actually arrive. Choosing presence looked small. Sitting with her coffee. Without checking for messages. Letting silence exist. Without filling it with explanations. Feeling sadness rise. And not pushing it away. Just saying, quietly, "I'm here. Here with my breath. Here with my body. Here with what's real." She realized how often she used to abandon herself before anyone else could. How she would leave her own emotions to keep someone comfortable. How she treated presence like a reward instead of a right. Now, when something felt heavy, she stayed with it. Not to analyze, not to fix, just to feel. And feeling, without judgment, began to feel like safety. Choosing presence also meant choosing honesty. Not the kind that confronts, the kind that aligns. If she didn't want to go somewhere, she didn't go. If she felt tired, she rested. If a conversation felt empty, she didn't force it to continue. Presence is radical. When you've spent years adapting to absence, it feels unfamiliar, almost selfish. But slowly, she noticed something change. Her shoulders softened. Her thoughts slowed. Her body stopped bracing for disappointment. She wasn't waiting anymore. Presence taught her the difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is the ache of not being met. Aloneness, with presence, is spacious. It holds you. There were moments she missed him, but the missing no longer hollowed her out, because she was no longer missing herself. Choosing presence didn't erase grief. It gave grief a place to land. A place where it didn't have to scream, to be noticed. A place where it could rest. And in that quiet rest, she felt something steady grow. Not excitement, not hope tied to someone else, but trust. Trust that she could stay, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was quiet, even when no one was watching. Presence became her promise, not to a relationship, but to herself. 16 Quiet healing and release. Healing didn't end with closure. It ended with release. Not the kind that burns bridges. Not the kind that rewrites the past. The kind that loosens the grip and lets the heart breathe again. Evelyn didn't need a final conversation. She didn't need him to finally understand, because understanding was no longer the medicine. Presence was. Quiet healing is when you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to move on. It's when you stop measuring your worth by how much pain you can endure. It's when you realize you don't need to carry everything to prove your love was real. Love doesn't require self-betrayal. Release didn't feel like relief at first. It felt empty, like standing in a room after the furniture is gone. But then, space appeared. Room to stretch. Room to rest. Room to become someone who no longer shrinks. She stopped replaying old conversations. Stopped asking, what if I had said it differently? Because the truth had already spoken. She needed presence. He couldn't offer it. That was the whole sentence. Quiet healing is forgiving yourself for staying too long, for hoping too hard, for loving deeply in a place that couldn't hold you. There is no shame in that. Only humanity. And release is choosing not to punish yourself for wanting more. Evelyn didn't become fearless. She became free. Free from negotiating her needs. Free from translating silence into love. Free from calling survival connection. She learned this truth gently. You can miss someone and still not return. You can love someone and still let go. You can heal without an apology. And maybe that's what quiet healing really is. Not forgetting, not erasing, but finally setting yourself down. If this story spoke to something you've lived, something you've never quite had words for, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters here. And if you want more stories about grief, love, and quiet healing, subscribe to Hidden Angle Podcast. We're here for the truths we carry softly.